And as a session will be recorded today, so those that have registered will be able to be provided with a copy of that afterwards as well. So I might just go ahead and do the introduction if that's all good, and we'll go from there. So a very warm welcome to you all, and I'm going to open with a karakia. Kia ino tātou, mori oho, mori tū, mori ora, kia tātou, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Well, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here to our LIANZA TEL-SIG session today on the Information Literacy Framework project at the House of Commons Parliament Library in the UK. And we're very pleased to be joined with our special guest, Anne-Lise Harding, who has met with us before. We mustn't have put her off because she actually offered another session. And so we're very grateful to have her here with us today. And in this presentation, Anne-Lise from the House of Commons Parliament will share with us the development of an information literacy framework aimed at highly skilled researchers from the House of Commons through an equality, diversity and inclusion lens. And this will cover the background of the project, as well as information behaviour research, module development, peer review and delivery. So Anne-Lise is a Senior Liaison Librarian at the House of Commons and Deputy Chair of the CILIP Information Literacy Group. And her interests lie in information literacy and equality and diversity. And she's currently working on developing the Media and Information Literacy Alliance, so that's the MILA framework, in collaboration with CILIP and the wider information professional community. So I hope I got that right. We're going to invite Anne-Lise to give a presentation to us. And throughout that, you're more than welcome to put some questions and responses in the chat. And my colleagues from TEL-SIG, Diana and Siobhan, might be able to help with those there. And at the end, we'll have some times for question and answers. So yes, without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Anne-Lise.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And thank you, everybody, for putting up with me. Trying to find my slides and everything and my notes as well. So I'm gonna share my screen with you and let me, that's always a test, this one, isn't it? Here we go. That's going to take my notes away. Is there any chance, Natalie, that I could quickly send you the PowerPoint? You could share your screen for me so that I can have my notes on. Yeah, so let me just bear with me whilst I do this.
That's fine. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. I'm sure we can all give you that consideration, considering it's the wrong day.
And if you anticipate some questions, if you want to put them in the chat for me, we'll send Natalie the PowerPoint.
Sure.
And then we can get started.
I see some people have introduced themselves in the chat too, and that's always really lovely. Helpful. Really good to see who's there. So perhaps you can take a moment to do that as well. And I'll be checking my inbox. Hopefully it's doing what it's supposed to.
Yeah, that is going to come your way. You'll have to skip the first slide because I've not had time to work on this. That was planned for tomorrow.
If it's there.
But
perhaps try sending it to Jess as well. That might be a good idea, just in case I'm not going to get it.
So while Natalie is receiving my email, I'm just going to get started and introduce myself. So I'm Anne-Lise Harding. I'm Senior Liaison Librarian at the House of Commons that sits within the UK Parliament. I'm normally a very organised person, so this is a bit of a traumatic experience, this start for me. So today I'm going to share with you my experience of developing an information literacy program for select committee researchers from a needs analysis that I carried out straight through to delivery. And I'm also going to share some practical ideas with you. So I started working at the House of Commons in January 2020. So I got 2 months in the office before we were all locked down. And before that, I spent 10 years working in the education sector, and I worked straight from primary schools all the way to higher education. So I did the whole path, and then finally found a job outside of the education sector. So hopefully I've timed the presentation well, and I'm going to have time to answer your questions at the end. Otherwise, I'll make sure to answer them by email. So I wanted to start by giving you a bit of context about where I fit in the House of Commons and UK Parliament, because my job role is Senior Liaison Librarian in the House of Commons Library. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean that I work in the Palace Library. When Natalie manages to share the slides, there is actually you might have to send them to,
no, you might have to send them to Jess as well, if that's all right. Sorry, I've gone in and out of my mail and it's not there. Must take a long time to travel, huh?
We'll say that. Well, when it comes, you'll see the House of Commons Library. But the term liaison means I sit between two departments, the House of Commons Library and select committee teams. And my role is to work between the two departments and bring the practices of both research functions closer together. So what I do is I bring a library perspective to the day-to-day work of select committee teams. And it's articulated around three main functions: liaison, training, and outreach. So I'm this go-between between those two huge entities. So if we start with the library, the House of Commons Library primary mission is to provide impartial information, which is confidential for members of Parliament. This is why the official name of the library inside the House is RNI, which stands for Research and Information. And then but between us, we call it the library. And the library service allows members of Parliament to be fully prepared and throughout their roles, so from supporting their constituency casework to preparing for debates or sitting on select committee inquiries. Some use the library as a way of gathering evidence for political point scoring, but most of the inquiries are noble in their intentions. And we receive requests for research across the political spectrum, and we give an identical service to all our customers to facilitate political scrutiny. So we are completely impartial and we don't take sides. Oh, brilliant. I'm glad this reached you, Natalie. So here you go, on the screen you can see, this is the House of Commons Library. It sits in the Palace of Westminster, so right by the Elizabeth Tower, which has Big Ben at the top. This is where we are located, so you can see it's absolutely beautiful when you step in there. Could I have the next slide, Natalie, please? So this is it. So next, so I've talked a little bit about how I work in the library, but I was also appointed to work for the library closely with select committees. And I'm afraid I have not done the research about the way Parliament works in New Zealand. So I'm going to talk about the British case, which is that select committee are not usually a very well-known function of Parliament. And when I applied for the job and when I got the job, I only had a really vague idea of what they were. So for those of you who might not be sure, select committees are a group of MPs from across, so MPs, members of Parliament, sorry, from across the political spectrum. And the numbers are based on the party majority in the Commons. And what they do is they come together to scrutinise the work of the government, of each government department. So basically what they do is they get together and they ask tough questions around current work, around current policies, around current issues. And based on all of this, they provide a report for the government, demanding a response, usually within 2 months. And this is what we call an inquiry. And I've put on the slide here for you the sort of scenes that we were familiar with before the pandemic and during the pandemic and back again now. So on the top right of your screen, you can see a typical select committee session. And that's what it still looks like these days. So you've got the members of parliament sitting around the table, which we call in a horseshoe shape, so we call it the horseshoe table. And then you've got the witnesses at the front on the table, just answering the questions in a sort of ping pong fashion. And then, so that was on the, sorry, the top left, actually. I'm terrible with my left and right. And then on the right, you've got what it looked like during the pandemic. So you can see, we were one of the first parliaments around the world to implement a remote system for the running of day-to-day business. So as you can see, you've got the witnesses on the screen taking part in Zoom, and that was a very different experience. And you can see that the members were also, there were fewer of them and they were socially distanced. The bottom pictures I've chosen to illustrate how sometimes select committees bring the headlines to them by inviting well-known figures. So I'm not sure if you will recognize on the left, this is celebrity chef Jamie Oliver, who gave evidence for an inquiry on the sugar tax, and that was by the Health Committee in 2015. And on the right, we've got Sir David Attenborough, when he gave evidence in 2019 to the Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy Committee, and that was a session on clean growth strategy. So these are the sort of images we see in the British press when we talk about select committees. You need to bear in mind that select committees hear from all sorts of witnesses. It could be members of the public, it could be users of public services, it could be academics, researchers, people who work for think tanks or pressure groups. So you can see a wide range of people, but mostly the headlines grab those real, the celebrity, the star witnesses, we call them sometimes. So just to give you a bit of context, you know, the select committees would run inquiries into particular subjects to raise public awareness or to shed lights on a neglected issue. They might want to be scrutinizing government policy if they think that, you know, there are some blind spots that they want to investigate. They might also want to look at the expenditure of a department, or they might want to generate interest in potential future development, or just, you know, ask questions in more detail that they normally get to in the chamber. So I've said all of this, which I know is quite a lot of procedure and policy. It's quite heavy, but it was very important for me to describe all of this to you, because behind all of this machinery are a variety of staff that work with select committees. We've got communication professionals, we've got transcribers, we've got clerks who oversee the running of the inquiries, and most importantly for me anyway, are the researchers. And those colleagues that I work with the most are the researchers, and we call them select committee specialists. Could I have the next slide, Natalie? So one of the reasons I was chosen for the role is my background in information literacy. It was the subject of my master's dissertation, and it's my area of expertise. So as Natalie said, I'm the deputy chair of the Information Literacy Group at CILIP. And I get involved in a lot of events. So for example, just LILAC, our Information Literacy Conference. So one of my projects from the start, working in the House of Commons, was to introduce information literacy in select committees, but in particular, the specialist researchers. So just as a reminder, I've put here on the slide that information literacy is defined by CILIP as the ability to think critically and make balanced judgments about any information we find and use. And when this definition was produced in 2018, and it was a long time in the making, we also thought that it's great to have an umbrella definition, a very broad definition, but we also wanted to contextualize it into further context. So we wrote about what information literacy means in everyday life, what it means in citizenship, in education, in the workplace, and in health. And I will try and remember at the end to post a link. I'm not sure you're able, you might. So when I share the slides, actually, the hyperlink on the slide will take you to the definition. And it's a 4 or 5 page PDF, and it has those definitions in context. So for me, the select committee researchers, they work at the intersection of workplace information literacy, but also citizenship. And I really wanted to make the concept meaningful within Parliament, because information literacy for people other than librarians, usually, I'm caveating this by saying usually, doesn't resonate much. So I've chosen the term information scrutiny, because scrutiny in Parliament relates, it's a familiar concept for us. And then the introduction of the word information introduced that element of new knowledge and expertise. So I was trying to make it an attractive offer and something that we think, oh, okay, I'm not really sure about this, and to try and entice them that way. So could I have the next slide, please, Natalie? So those committee specialists that I've spoken about, they are like any researchers I've come across in the past. So as I said, my background is working in education. So I had experience of supporting academic researchers, and I'm sure you will recognize this when I say it. You know, people who get very academically involved, are very proactive with their research, produce research. Whereas my committee specialists, they are experts in their field. They are very, very brilliant, capable minds. They've got PhDs, they've got extensive experience in the field. But what I found is that they perform hybrid research, and that's due to the nature of the inquiries. So they have different ways of gathering information that we're not really used to. They do not often use academic journals or peer-reviewed literature, like academics must do in higher education. They base their research on news pieces, on think tank reports, on ONG reports, so mostly a lot of grey literature. And they also carry out a lot of what I call social research. So for example, if we had an inquiry around flammable cladding, they would go and talk to the people directly affected by this, instead of talking to research, well, as well as talking to researchers. So, and that's because the inquiries that are carried out by select committees are sometimes really, really fast. So those researchers need to gather a huge amount of evidence in order to produce the reports to support the scrutiny in the hearings. So for me, this carried some quite fundamental questions. How do you train highly confident and capable researchers in information literacy? And it really was a difficult issue for me to wrap my head around. I have a background working in academic libraries, delivering information literacy instructions mostly to undergraduates. So I'm sure you will agree that with teaching graduates and postgraduates, it's quite a heavy focus in the information literacy research. So, you know, I had a network of contacts, I had a network of experts. I knew where to get information about best practice. So altogether, it was a very different crowd from the crowd I'm working with now. The other question I had was, how do you enrich fully functioning practices? And here, the key word is enrich. Because as opposed to my previous roles, I'm not teaching anything new. I'm only thinking about the best practice in the information literacy field in select committees and in carrying out research. because the last thing I wanted to do was to stand in front of an expert crowd and tell them what they already know. So I needed to do some really careful considerations before going ahead. So how did I go about answering those questions? I conducted some information needs and information behavior research to better understand my audience in spring 2020. So it talked about the research practices, how they had evolved to suit the needs of select committees, how the policy area affected the research as well, and the typical running of an inquiry. So I conducted 15 interviews with specialists across different select committee teams. And I also carried out other activities to help me understand research in the select committee context. So things like shadowing inquiries, attending training, and also having a look at scoping documents and reports. So I'm going to go very quickly over the next 2 slides, Natalie, but can I have the next one? This is a bit dense, and I'm sure it's also really small on your screen. So when the PowerPoint this year, that'll be a bit clearer. But what I did out of all of this research was I built 2 broad profiles to differentiate what interventions I wanted to build for each group. So generalists are colleagues with experience of research and of a policy area, but they're attached to a different committee. So these researchers tend to move between committees usually every couple of years. And then we have the specialists. So we've got a generalist specialist and a specialist specialist, if that's confusing enough. So the specialist is a research professional with an advanced knowledge and or a qualification in the policy area they cover. And these colleagues do not tend to circulate as often, and usually it's not really far from the preferred subject. And then what I did is to break it down even further, I split the profile between early career and early career generalists and early career specialists. So as you can see on my slide, sorry, can you go back, Natalie? So as you can see, the generalists will spend a bit more time during their active research and their analysis just to make sure that what they're selecting is the right information. Whereas the specialists will spend a bit more time cultivating their knowledge management and looking at their networks and looking at who they know, so developing that side. Next slide, Natalie. Thank you. On this slide, you can see the subject knowledge versus the research skill balance for mid-career. So I've defined mid-career as people past their first 2 years of employment. And generalists, as you can see, they've honed their research techniques, or they balance their research time to find specialist information that they appraise for suitability. And the specialists, they've developed their knowledge of the policy area, so they're able to find and assess information quickly. So this means that for me, in terms of my research approach, the generalist differentiation focuses on developing refined research skills to support the development of subject knowledge, whereas the specialist focuses on applying that specialist knowledge to the research techniques and embed them within their working practice. So I'm sorry, I realized that the last 2 slides were a bit abstract. We're going to go into more concrete detail from now on. Next slide, please, Natalie. Okay, I'm actually going to skip this. No, I'm not going to skip this one. So I've talked about information literacy in general, but I knew that to develop an appropriate and challenging information literacy framework, I needed an approach that was suited to my very particular audience, to get them to understand that information literacy was a valuable opportunity to develop themselves, to enhance their role, but also to have a concrete societal impact. So I needed an angle and a way to make them understand that us librarians have got the knowledge and the skills to enhance their research practices for the greater good. Now, diversity and inclusion is have been on everybody's mind, and rightfully so. In Parliament, like many workplaces, there's been a focus on recruitment, on retention, on the progression of colleagues, and all of the training we can think of to regulate the balance and address disparities. For select committees, this is underpinned by the 2019 Liaison Committee report on the effectiveness and influence of the select committee system. And it recognized that there had been a lot of work that went into encouraging more gender diversity, and that was a direct result of the report that you can see on the right. But the 2019 report, the one on the left, stated that these efforts and this good practice needed to be applied to increase witness diversity and to go further on BAME representation. So in practical terms, we're talking about increasing the diversity of evidence received, the diversity of witnesses, and the efforts to make everybody feel able to participate in this democratic process from the start to finish. And for me, I really felt strongly about this, and I could relate it to, with my education background, to the work around decolonization is very, very prevalent in librarianship in the UK at the moment. So I chose to focus my information literacy program on research through a diversity and inclusion lens, because these select committees, needing to be fast and efficient, they tend to rely on the same people, the same experts, the same witnesses. And this pool also happens to be in majority white, male, and on the older side of the spectrum. And I always say this, that it's not something controversial that I'm saying here, because it's actually the chairman of the liaison committee, Sir Bernard Jenkins, who said this, and he actually called these people the usual suspects. So can I have the next slide, please, Natalie? So this is the inquiry life cycle. These are all the stages a select committee will go through to complete an inquiry. There are a lot of interventions to increase diversity in terms of witnesses, in terms of the panels, a lot of gathering data and interviewing people with lived experience. But as you can see, our first step here is called choose subject and scoping. It's what we call the scoping stage. Scoping is when the researchers go and gather as much information as possible at the start of an inquiry to give a frame for future questions and scrutiny. So it's a review of the landscape, if you'd like, and this is usually something that they do not have a lot of time to put together. Can I have this next slide, please, Natalie? Okay, so these are all the information activities that I've plotted against the inquiry life cycle. So as you can see, we've got at the start of the inquiry, which is I've called the identify stage. Then we've got the finding stage in grey with the active research. When we've got yellow, we've got the evaluate stage. In blue, we've got the manage. And in green, we've got communicate. So you can see how it almost follows the definition of information literacy. So we conduct this, we highlight the need, we do the research, we appraise what our findings, we also have a look at our findings beyond, and then we reuse the information that we found. So this was the base of the framework. Could I have the next slide, please? So this was translated into a range of modules to be developed last year in 2021. And in bold are the modules that have already been developed. So it's going to come, there's going to be no surprise that the first one is Introduction to Library Services. I'm sure you've all delivered the same session in your institutions. It's just a good old introduction module for new starters, especially introducing the sources of the House of Commons Library, who we are, what we do, but crucially how we can help. So it's not strictly within the framework, but I think it's a prerequisite, if you want, for new starters. The second module we have under the identify stage is research biases. And this session, I really like it. It looks at cognitive and digital biases that work together to prevent us from finding the most diverse research. And we also look at how these impact select committee research in particular. Then on the find, we've got searching diverse sources. And this session follows on logically from the previous one on research biases, and it introduces different methods to find more diverse content, but also interrogate what authority means and what notions of power there as well. And then finally, under evaluate, we've got evaluating diverse information, which is good old critical thinking. And that's not to say that the researchers do not critically assess the sources they find, but as I said, because they're under a lot of time pressure, we give them the tools to enhance and systematize their critical thinking. So they think in more details about whether or not they've taken diversity into consideration and how and what the impact is going to be. So I'm currently working on diverse current awareness, but I think this one is going to be more of a one-to-one approach, and then one on communication strategies, which hopefully we're going to develop and deliver with other specialist colleagues, communication colleagues, so that it's a different approach in each module. Can I have the next slide, Natalie, please? So how did we go about developing all of this content? It's first important to mention that I did not do so all on my own. I was really fortunate to have my colleague Phil Abraham to help me, and we tasked ourselves with developing one module a month, and this was super ambitious. So this included writing a lesson plan, researching the content, reviewing each other's work, but we did this rigorously. We met our deadlines, and what we did to keep ourselves to task and to centralize all our resources is we use Microsoft OneNote. So this is what you can see on the slide right now. You don't need all of the tiny little detail because it's a bit boring, but it's just to show you how we organized ourselves. So OneNote was really good. It allows us to create a tab per module and to centralize all of our notes, all of our ideas, all of the links, all of the articles, and to ping each other questions as well. So it was a really collaborative process. And we also had a tab to organize our content according to our lesson plan. So it was, in the end, it was more information than we needed. So you can see all of this on the slide didn't make it to the final version of the module. But in the end, we put it all together and we ended up with a script. So we usually divided up the writing up. So we each ended up with half the slides. Then we took roughly around a week to write it all up. So in practical terms, and I'm hoping, I saw your question pop up, so I'm hoping this answers the question. It would go 1 week to research, with a meeting at the end to have a look at what to keep, what was within the remits of the module, and what to put aside for another module. Then we had 1 week to write the content assigned to us, with again a meeting at the end to review what we'd done. 1 week for me to design the PowerPoint. This is my favorite part, by the way. Design the PowerPoint, work on the script further, with a meeting at the end, again to review the content. And this usually at this point involved reviewing the content holistically. So did everything flow? Did it work seamlessly? Were the activities we planned for engagement appropriate? And because at this point I'd put the PowerPoint together, Phil was also my critical help in this. Then finally, we used the last week to make all of the snagging fixes we highlighted in the previous meeting. And then that was it, 4 weeks, and we had a module ready. So this is the theory. We mostly stuck to the timeline. What I would say is that we ended up going down so many rabbit holes because we're both very passionate about this content. So we go and follow leads that most of the time did not make it into the final cuts of the module. I would say if this is a process you're interested in, I think it's important to follow your curiosity, because what this allowed us to do was to build up our knowledge of all of the subjects that were on the periphery of our modules, and then allow us to look at our content in a deeper way, but also allow us to answer the questions of the audience on the day, if they had any, and also adapt our content to our audience, depending on where their knowledge, the baseline of their knowledge was. And then we also found, as we went through this process, that every couple of months, we'd have to go back to the modules we just produced and have a look, because of the sector that we work in, we found that a lot of things were happening. So we had more relevant examples to add retrospectively, or new legislation that was coming up, or new examples. So there was this ongoing process of looking at the modules. Could I have the next slide, please? And the stage that I found the most valuable for me was the peer review stage, because when I worked in higher education in the UK, we have I'm not sure how this applies for you, but we do co-creation with students quite a lot, and I wanted to replicate how this process for the workplace with a completely different new audience. So, because I knew from the start that whilst I had the knowledge around information literacy and EDI and my modules, I did not know what those issues necessarily looked like in practical terms for select committee researchers. So this is why I needed colleagues to peer review and to inject some of their knowledge. So I had some contacts to start with, some colleagues who were really keen to support this process. I also advertised through one of our regular email bulletins. And soon we had a team of 10 peer reviewers that had offered to help us, and we also had some diversity champions helping us. And the way it went is I had a 15 meeting with them, really, really brief and really short, just to say, thank you so much, bring them on board, talk about what would be involved, reassure them about the timeline, and really get their buy-in and provide a more personal approach to the task. So what was crucial for us was to make the peer review process as easy and straightforward as possible. So the peer reviewers had a month to submit feedback. They would receive a shared link to the PowerPoint with the slide notes and the instructions. And then they had 3 weeks before I sent an email with a gentle reminder. So we invited 2 types of responses about the content. First, general comments such as, does the knowledge flow well? Is this advice practical, and why? And then secondly, we invited comments using the comment function on PowerPoint. So what we would do is we would leave specific comments on the slides when we needed very, very specific feedback. For example, how has this manifested in your job? Or give me an example of this. So all of the instructions for the peer review were in the PowerPoint, and there were 3 slides. We wanted the process to be really, really easy for them. So included not taking for granted their level of digital literacy. That's why we had those slides. So the one you can see on the left explains how to do the peer review process. And then what we did is we collated at the end all of the feedback, which is what you can see on the right, which resulted in a big to-do list of what to do for each slide. And then, so that was the first month was the creation of the content. The second month was the peer review. So after 2 months, we had the module ready to be delivered. Can I have the next slide, Natalie, please? That's a very flattering picture of me here, by the way. I really need to change the screen capture. So when we had all of this finished, it was a bit daunting, but we had to start delivering it. But we were so in love with our content. All of the modules were babies, so it was daunting. So we advertised through the standard departmental update newsletter. We had a really, really good take-up. But we had to cap, we made a decision to cap at 10 participants because we found that because we were delivering online, we needed really good engagement and good discussions to take place. And I'm sure you know, the more people in the session, the less talking that happens, usually for us anyway. So we knew from the start that we were going to deliver these modules through Microsoft Teams. So we made sure to have activities as well that lend themselves to good engagement and interactivity in those sessions. So we use things like Padlet. We would pick random names to answer questions. We would be sending the questions in advance, the icebreaker in advance, so anything to make our audience a bit more comfortable with us. And each of the modules takes about an hour and a half to be delivered. And we found that it was best to share between two presenters as well. So Phil and I delivered these because an hour and a half is a long time on your own to talk and to corral an audience and engaging with you. So what I'm going to do, because I'm conscious of the time, and I think I've seen a lot of questions, I'm going to move up 2 slides for me, Natalie. So not this one, not this one. Just talk a little bit about the future. And I'll answer if you've got questions about impact or questions about slides I miss on delivery, please do ask me the questions. But the future, what's next? So as always, as I mentioned, there is the continuous review work that takes place with Phil and I to make sure that each of the modules is still up to date every time we deliver, but also that it reflects developments in the field of information literacy. And that also reflects the feedback from the previous attendees. So we were always on this cycle of improvement. The second is adaptation, because this is very select committee focused, but we know that there are other audiences in Parliament that would benefit from this content, the House of Commons Library being the primary target. But we also know that this would require some more working on the content and the examples. So for example, the second session on diverse sources, it includes a lot of information on bibliographic databases and searching techniques that researchers in the library do use already. So that wouldn't necessarily apply to them in the same way. The third project is the module development. As I shared earlier, we've got plans to produce more modules, so you can see them on the slide, things like becoming a reflective practitioner or inclusive citations are in the work. And then this is where I'm going to leave it, because I want you to have plenty of time for questions. So I think if you move to the next slide, thank you, Natalie. I know this was probably a bit rushed, and I apologize again for coming in late and having trouble with the slides, but my email address is on this slide. I'm always more than happy to hear from people who have questions, who want to know more. So please do write to me and make sure to get all of the information you need. So that's me done.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a great
Yeah.
talk. Yeah, really liked it. And I couldn't see the chat, so I am hoping that Anne-Lise, you might would have been able to, or Diana, and you guys can help us from there so we can make the most of this time left.
Yes, thanks. Philip had a question. He asked Anne-Lise whether you're familiar with the Overton database as a source of policy documents.
Yes, actually, it's a project that sort of landed in my inbox not so long ago. So it was actually, I had the exact same question from my colleague in POST, which is the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. And POST is a department that sits within the House of Commons Library. And their role is to bring academic research, so from higher education usually, to exchange knowledge with Parliament. And they have been talking about Overton for a while and they wanted me involved. So have I heard of it? Yes, I will be involved soon. This is all I can say at this time.
All right, and I think you might have covered the other question which Adrian posted, asking about the time frame for investigation, managing, contextualizing, and producing the results.
Yeah, so I'm glad actually, Adrian, when I saw your question pop up on the window, I could only see the top, so I hope I've answered it. But 2 months is the time frame that we set ourselves with Phil. It probably could have been quicker if it had just been me putting the content together. However, I wanted it to be very collaborative, because I think it, especially when we talk about research, when we talk about gathering research, when we talk about being more diverse and inclusive, well, you can't produce something on your own and say it's about inclusion, basically. So you could do it in different contexts quicker, but I also wanted to make sure that the peer review was really kind to the peer reviewers. I didn't want to rush them and tell them, oh, you only have a week to tell me. So if it's something that you wanted to replicate, it has to be tailored for where you work, and only you will know that. Thank you for your point, Adrian.
So that's all the questions in the chat so far. Would anybody else like to add any?
You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask if you want to. That would be great.
I might put someone on the spot, but Jessie said that she is joining from the Parliamentary Library. So Jessie, if you've got any questions, if you'd like to get in touch to talk more about what we have in common and what's different, I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Anne-Lise. Yeah, I'll get in touch maybe at a later date. I don't have any specific questions at the moment. I'm kind of multitasking, I'm sorry to say. But yeah, definitely interested to see, because we also work closely with our select committees, not so much in my capacity, but our researchers do. So I might send them your way. Yeah, I'm sure they'd be really interested, sorry, in this.
Well, I'm writing your name down right now, so I don't forget. Yeah, I have a cup of tea after this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, though. It was very, very interesting to hear. And like, yeah, we have the same thing, I guess, in our Parliament. Select committee is such an important part of the process, but not very well known. But we don't have the big, well, we kind of do, but we don't have the big celebrity headline grabbers coming. But yeah, cool to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Hell of a lot of work you've done. And,
thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in the effect of it and the feedback you've got. Like, the aim is to improve, well, for me, it would be to improve the quality of policy advice coming from select committees in this case. But how is it going? How are the researchers in select committees using more diverse sources or using them better as a result of the training, the modules?
Well, you will know that this is something really, really hard to capture and to measure. So I think that it's very nuanced, because when we say in the sessions, different things appeal to different people. So there are things that the attendees will already do, some things that they do not. So it's the last thing we do in the modules is we ask them to commit. What are they going to commit? What is the one action that they will take away and act upon? So, you know, it could be things like, oh, I will make sure to review my sources, or I will use this website in particular. But in terms of checking with them, it's not something that we've done yet. We started delivering at the start of this year. We're 6 months into the process. No, seven now. But you're prompting me to think it would be really interesting to go back to them and see what they remember. I think it's always the interesting question when you've delivered an information literacy session, is ask 6 months post-delivery. What do you remember? And what has become a habit? Why has it become a habit? And if it hasn't, why? What have been the hurdles? So I'd love to say it has an impact. I'm hoping it has a very subtle impact. But I have to say it's also difficult, because working with select committees, the briefs that come are already biased in a way. They know, you know, when the brief is selected, we know what we want to prove. So that is a hurdle in how much diversity you can have to start with anyway. So it's a small contribution, but I hope that with time we can prove that it has an impact.
I'm also interested in how you arranged the sessions for the researchers. Was it compulsory, or how did it come about?
So no, they're not compulsory. They're part of a wider program of support for select committee staff called Select Committee School. Select Committee School is a range of 15 modules now, and it's mostly at introductory level. So the information scrutiny program sits above, I would say, that's more intermediate. So there are talks of integrating it with another program called the Effective Scrutiny Program, which is very ambitious. But in terms of the content, would probably be more, that would be more harmonious, I think. So those 15 modules of Select Committee School are open to anybody in the Select Committee team. And, you know, anybody can enroll and take the training.
Yeah.
Right. Just conscious of our time there, Anne-Lise, but that's really interesting. I think I work in a university library, so I think we should have an academic researchers school, absolutely. compulsory, so that they know about those sources. I'd just like to thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. It's just so nice to feel like we've got a colleague in the UK and someone that we may be able to call back again at some point, which would be, I hope we can.
Oh, please do. And this time I hope
you did amazingly well. Right, you did amazing. So thank you so much in terms of just being so responsive and flexible, and yeah, at the drop of a hat here for us, which is awesome. So I would just like to close our session with a closing karakia. And as I say, you've got Anne-Lise's details there in the chat, the email, if you'd like to get in contact, and we should have the recording and slides out shortly. So kia ino tātou, whakanoa e tēnei wahi, whakanoa e tēnei korero, whakanoa e tēnei tangata, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and have a good sleep. Kia ora.
Thank you, everybody.